I want to begin this morning by asking you to think about the worst odor ever to meet your nostrils. Was it a paper mill, petroleum refinery, package of hamburger left in the back of the refrigerator, child's diaper, burned human flesh, stagnant pool of rancid water? Well, a tannery smells even worse. In the ancient Near East, and even in parts of the world today, leather is tanned in huge pits dug in the ground. The hair on the hide is removed, usually with lime, and then the hide is steeped in a natural chemical obtained from certain plants. Great heaps of rotting hair and bits of flesh scraped off the hide surround the tanning pits. I saw and smelled one of those tanning pits on a pilgrimage to companion churches in Namibia back in 2004. Yuck. We get this remarkable event in our first reading today. Several believers send for Simon Peter to come to Joppa, which is near present-day Tel Aviv, to raise a woman named Tabitha from the dead. We get from the storyline that Tabitha, aka Dorcas, was a devout leader of charitable operations in the community of Joppa. It sounds like she was really involved in clothing ministry. She was probably the first century equivalent of Cindy Sundstrom. She was the kind of steady disciple who would run the local food pantry or clothes closet or knitting ministry in our community today. After Tabitha's death, the community was devastated by the loss of her and her social ministry leadership. They called on Simon Peter to come and do something about the situation. And by the life-giving power of the risen Christ, Peter raises Tabitha from the dead and gets her off and running again with her ministry. And then we stumble upon this short sentence to conclude the account. Meanwhile, Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner. One commentator I read brushed off the significance of this sentence. Others, including myself, begged to differ. The fact that the risen Christ led Peter to the house of Simon the tanner is just as significant as Sister Tabitha's being raised from the dead. Why? Now, can you imagine how Peter would have tried to explain the odor on his clothes once he returned to the other elders in Jerusalem, back at headquarters? Coming back from Simon's tanning pits, the stench itself is bad enough, but we also know that tanners were cited among the list of so-called despised trades in the first century. Woe to him who is a tanner, cried certain rabbis. Tanners and dung collectors often were the same persons. They did the same jobs. Tanners were outcasts among the people because their trade required working daily with animal carcasses, which made them ritually unclean and unfit for worship in the temple. You see, when Peter dares to enter the house of Simon the tanner to receive hospitality there, he's signing on for considerable discomfort and lowering his social reputation a notch or two. What do you suppose, brothers and sisters, led Peter to move beyond his comfort zone to shepherd this tanner from Joppa into the ministry and fellowship of Jesus Christ? How was Peter moved to stoop like a shepherd and see beyond the smell of potentially pleasing new disciple of Jesus Christ? Well, today is observed in many places across the world as Good Shepherd Sunday. We hear Jesus identify himself as the Good Shepherd. Before we get too cozy and carried away with the bucolic landscapes and lily-clean sheep, a contradiction in terms, we would do well to sniff the realism. The Lord our shepherd never allows the smell, sinfulness, or unpleasantness to deter him from embracing the sheep. How then was Peter moved to step out of his comfort zone from Tabitha's shadow of death and surprising resurrection to the house of Simon the tanner? Because the Lord did not allow either Peter's fishy stench or the repulsive stench of Peter's own arrogance and stubbornness from getting in the way of God's divine intervention of grace. Because Jesus never took his eye off roughshod Peter as his own dear lamb, never took his eye of love off Peter even on a cross, never ceased to come to Peter after his resurrection, Peter was filled with the same life-giving presence in order to step into the struggles and stench of the one called Simon the tanner. Friends, who is the tanner in your life today? How will you become that person's shepherd even as the Lord is your great shepherd? When will you lead your new friend to Jesus Christ and invite her to the table spread generously where God's abiding presence becomes personally clear? Perhaps the tanner you most recognize today is you yourself. You think that the stench of your own sinfulness is unworthy of the shepherd's embrace? You think you can continue to cover this stench with the French baths of excuses and rationalizations? You think that you have to lift yourself up a moral notch or two before this shepherd will consider your resume of admittance into the kingdom? Think again, my friend. The Lord is not one who waits to approve those who have first improved themselves. He meets us where we are, and then he takes us to a different place. On this day, let us not romanticize this shepherding business. It stinks. Only our Lord Jesus Christ, who could take on such an aroma of sinfulness and death, overshadowing every last lamb of us, and change us into living sacrifices acceptable to God. Only our Lord could embrace every tanner, but also give up his own hide, his very own life, so that the tanner, the outcast and sinner, may now walk in newness of life. Such love and embrace from the Good Shepherd becomes so provocative to us that we too, with Simon Peter, can walk into the lives of others, bearing witness to the gospel in word and deed, even if we have to pinch our noses. Thanks be to God.